Oh, hi! You caught me getting pummeled by hail. Speaking of hail, let's hail to the master, Frank Quitely. Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Frank Quitely is one of my personal favorite illustrators in comics. No qualifications. I believe he's a master illustrator, and I don't throw that term around lightly. I think in order to be a master illustrator, you have to have a lot of tools in your belt. We're talking things like composition, pacing, lighting, your own style, an eye for action, and for panel-to-panel storytelling. Things like getting the work done quickly, having confidence. These are all things you need to be a master, and I would argue Quitely does that. That's at least the case I'm going to present to you today. Now, I'm not really here to summarize the stories that he's illustrated so much as I will be giving them context and will be breaking down certain pages and panels of his work. So, I'd like to take a page from one of the last sequential stories that he illustrated, Pax Americana, and then from there, we'll both jump backwards and forwards through his career. Let's do it. Pax Americana is a 2014 comic with art by Quitely that he did with his frequent collaborator, writer Grant Morrison. It's a one-issue story that uses the old Charlton superheroes like Question and Peacemaker to tell an alternate reality version of the Watchmen story, which was originally designed to use those characters. A part of its novelty is that it tells its story non-linearly, with most scenes in reverse, jumping back in time every several pages. The book is an example of Quitely at the height of his powers. His character work is instantly recognizable, but he's also fully in control of the pacing, and we see his eye for unique angles on the action. Here's a page of exposition between two characters, which can be one of the more challenging scenes for an artist to render in such a way that it still engages the reader. Quitely has broken the de facto rule of stacking panels atop one another to be read left to right and top to bottom in a Z pattern. Instead, each panel flows into the next one in a weaving S-like pattern instead of the hard Z angles. Much of the background is intact, with panel borders serving to indicate a passage of time. We don't look at this page and think that there are multiple duplicate people in a stairwell. We can tell through their naturalistic body language that they are moving downstairs while talking. Even if we didn't have the dialogue, we have indications of what's important. The gentleman is in a hurry. The young woman is trying to argue something. In fact, there are some panels that break up the consistent background by zooming in, but only to emphasize the story beats that matter, a brief confrontation, and entering a special area. As story thresholds are crossed, the art emphasizes them. Similar to Watchmen, the cover of Pax Americana is revealed to be the first panel in the story, as Quitely pulls back and we see where the burning flag is. We're at the assassination of the President of the United States, and it shares some similarities to the Kennedy assassination. The flag was a peace sign, but on the first page, as it burns, it warps and is reminiscent of the number 8, an important motif in this story. The president has created Algorithm 8, a plan to bring peace to the world that involves superheroes. He also wears a ring that looks like an 8, but is also a reference to his father, who was a crime fighter that wore a domino mask. Turned sideways, that becomes an 8. Quitely inserts 3 more references to the number 8. First, a streak of blood across the S in the presidential seal looks like an 8. More subtle is the establishing shot of the presidential car, which the hood ornament indicates is a Cadillac from the era when they introduced their V8 engine. And finally, the default structure of the Pax Americana pages follows an 8-panel structure. That's a spin on artist Dave Gibbons using a recurring 9-panel structure for Watchmen. Unless Quitely has a specific reason to break it, that 8-panel structure is the storytelling default. The story then backs up, and we see the president assassinated. Quitely doesn't shy away from the carnage, and controls the pacing in what effectively looks like slow motion because of how many images we get in what would normally be a second's worth of time. This is an advantage of comics over something like a book or a film. The artist controls the pace. After that, we see the assassin, the superhero Peacemaker, making a sniper shot while skydiving. Quitely displays easy-to-follow panel-to-panel storytelling with a dynamic shot that implies both depth and motion. Further pages in Pax Americana allow Quitely to play with lighting techniques, such as the brutal interrogation of Peacemaker, where his pummeled face is drawn in chiaroscuro-styled inking. There is an exciting action sequence showing Peacemaker fighting his way through an army. The body gesture is note perfect. He captures the body at the most extreme moment of running, jumping, or punching. And in general, with his artwork, and whenever possible, Quitely shows the moment right after impact instead of the moment of impact itself. The result is always far more interesting than the action itself. A later page gets into the meta-narrative of Pax Americana, where ideas for politics and science have been pulled from comics. It features Captain Atom reading a comic book in the Large Hadron Collider. When the story aligns with his point of view, Quitely angles the camera so that we are nearly side by side with the superhero, and the background fractures into panels. This cosmic being is talking about how he perceives the world in more dimensions than people, just like they perceive the world around them in more dimensions than the two they would see on a comic book page. In just a small handful of pages, I've now outlined some of the things that Quitely does well. Interesting storytelling decisions, innovative character design, compelling emotion shown within those characters. Now, let's go ahead and jump back in time so that we can see how Quitely earned these skills. Frank Quitely was born and raised in Scotland and attended the Glasgow School of Art for 2 years before becoming a freelance artist. In 1990, Quitely began illustrating the comic strip The Greens in the underground comic Electric Soup. It was an homage to the comic strip The Bruins by Dudley D. Watkins, and you can see how accurately Quitely mimicked the design and style of the strip. He also illustrated a parody of Batman Returns, and from the beginning, you can see how Quitely emphasizes the humanity of the characters with clever caricature. It's now worth pointing out that the artist's real name is Vincent Deighan. Frank Quitely is a pen name. He explained back in 2008 that he came up with that because he was nervous about how his parents might react to his career choice. Frank Quitely is also what's called a spoonerism. In other words, a slight rearranging of a phrase, in this case, the phrase quite frankly. Came up with Frank Quitely. So when we look at that fun pen name and his early comics are humor comics, it's just easy to understand that there's always an infectious sense of humor imbued within all of his artwork. Quitely's early work caught the attention of editor David Bishop, who gave him work at 2000 AD, including working on the Inspector Shimura strip for Judge Dredd magazine. It was 1993, and his style is instantly recognizable, even though these comics come from the beginning of a lengthy career. From the start, we can see that Quitely's storytelling skills are rock solid, with a clear structure, and he's only breaking panel borders for specific reasons, such as introducing the main character or an especially key moment in the action. I always appreciated how well the lettering was integrated into the artwork of these pages. The lettering was done by Ellie DeVille, and it indicates a strong collaboration between artist and letterer. Quitely would go on to become a regular collaborator with two writers in particular, Grant Morrison and Mark Millar. In the 2 years following his work on Inspector Shimura, Quitely got his first work in U.S. comics, illustrating some pages for DC's Paradox Press imprint of big book titles, such as the Big Book of Urban Legends, and a story in Dark Horse Presents, beginning in issue 91, with his writer from Shimura, Mark Morrison. These comics are a relatively rare look at Quitely's work in black and white, and it's enjoyable to watch him practice on different types of textures. The action in the Dark Horse story, Blackheart, is notably clear and clean. We can look at his character work close up in the Urban Legends page and see Quitely's style. Most frequently, he uses thin, delicate line work to give his subjects character. None of them look the same, even though his style is recognizable. He often gives well-defined cheeks, lips, and smaller eyes compared to a lot of other Western artists. And I'd argue that where Quitely truly excels at drawing people is with his figure work. The gesture and posing is impeccable and has real weight to it. That brings us to 1996, which was an important year because it was the first time that Frank Quitely would team up with his future regular collaborator, Grant Morrison. They did a book called Mentallo, which was a spin-off from Morrison's Doom Patrol run. And what's interesting about it is it actually features a lot of the hallmarks that the duo would become recognized for. Mentallo is a surreal meta story where Flex is investigating a bomber who may be operating on a higher level of existence. He might be a writer of Flex's stories, or maybe a junkie hallucinating Flex's strange adventure, or any number of other possibilities. In practice, it allowed Quitely to be creative with his storytelling choices, referencing the tropes of comic book storytelling and subverting them. It also shows his aptitude for drawing well-muscled heroes, hairy guys, the elderly, and more. And again, when it comes to establishing a shot or establishing an action, Quitely makes decisions that are clever, unique, and engaging. Perhaps most importantly, I'd argue Quitely makes storytelling choices that put us beside a character. He doesn't hold them at arm's length. He pulls in tight for emotional or humorous beats and pulls wide to show body language for the big fight and action scenes. But he gives just as much detail to someone that's sick or older. To me, the characters are represented honestly, but with care. The camera doesn't distance us from them, but allows them to have intimate portraits. I'd now like to leap ahead in time to the year 2000, where Quitely stepped in to illustrate The Authority by Mark Millar, beginning with issue 13. Brian Hitch had established a so-called widescreen approach to the action, with long panels dominating the pages, mimicking the aspect ratio of a big-budget film. Quitely has a comparatively open line art style compared to Hitch's hyper-realistic rendering, but Quitely did keep the widescreen approach. The Authority is a larger-than-life super team, pulling no punches in their moves to eliminate terrorist threats, and the action is bombastic and over the top. Quitely can pull in for detailed portrayals of character faces from time to time to ground the narrative, but a lot of the book is wild action that you wouldn't see anywhere else, like Apollo flying through a giant villain's head. Issue 14 is a highlight of the run as it pits the Authority against a super team known as the Americans. It's a scathing satirization of American jingoism, and the Americans are stand-ins for the Avengers, placing the Authority as representatives of the Justice League of America. It's a bloody battle, but an exciting one, and Quitely knows what the audience is here for: the sex and violence. Sometimes that's just fun. I'm honestly not sure how intentional it is that Frank Quitely has so frequently collaborated with fellow Scottish writers, because they are all working on American comics. Nevertheless, that means that there's a unique level of commentary. Now, The Authority plays very differently now than it does back then, because it came out just before 9/11, and a lot of The Authority stories have America as a bit of a villain. But that really wasn't uncommon for its time. Even homegrown fiction like X-Files dealt with paranoia regarding America's power as a global player. What is interesting is seeing an outsider's perspective, because obviously they like working on American comics. They're all working in that field. So it's just interesting to see an outsider's perspective on a lot of these books. In 2001, Quitely reteamed with Morrison on New X-Men for a critically acclaimed run on the popular Marvel Mutants. While the story is great, I'm here to look at the artwork this episode. It clearly has influences from its time. The X-Men wear black leather, like in the new movies that had just come out, although Quitely gives the character designs his all. Cyclops is tall and lean. Wolverine is in full biker mode. Emma Frost has an X-themed barely there suit. There's also a storyline where new threat Cassandra Nova engineers a new sentinel that decimates the mutant island of Genosha. It's clearly a sci-fi take on the devastation New York had just gone through in real life. But Quitely also does some unique things. Mutants are given secondary mutations, which turns some of the characters into an outward image of their interior personalities. Beast becomes a regal lion. Emma Frost gains diamond-like skin as a barrier to the outside world. Content mirrors context. Of course, X-Men was also the largest audience Quitely had had at this point, so he also doesn't skimp on the epic action shots, weird mutant abilities, and interesting interpretations of their strange abilities, like this page that shows characters using telepathy, and thus we see two images layered within one another. Perhaps following X-Men, Quitely was looking for a change of pace, maybe a smaller project or at least a palate cleanser, because he next did something very different. He again teamed up with Grant Morrison, but they did a 3-issue series at DC Comics with no superheroes. It was called We 3, and it follows 3 pets, a dog, a cat, and a rabbit. They have been captured by the military and turned into cyborgs to be used as potential weapons. The story involves the pets breaking free, they escape, and they're trying to get home. It's unique, it's gorgeous, it's heartbreaking, and I think it shows that no matter what the project, no matter how many eyeballs are on it, Quitely always gives everything 100% effort. We 3 contrasts the innocence of animals with the fact that they are now war machines. This early page shows a shower of bullets tear through a target. It's dynamic, it's violent, it's in your face, but it's also kind of beautiful. Look at the decisions made in these 2 panels where a political leader meets the dog, Bandit, for the first time. We rarely see full faces of people in these issues because our point of view is aligned with the animals. But Quitely uses the body, specifically the hands, to convey the shock and apprehension at the Frankenstein-like monstrosity in front of him. Meanwhile, despite what's been done to Bandit, he still retains the personality of a dog, cocking his head because he's questioning the situation. There are no shortcuts for the artwork. The animals running away from their hunters lays out everything we need to know, from environment to speed to the stakes involved as we see bullets tear apart forest creatures nearby. The low angle allows for the hunters in helicopters above to oppress the characters from the top of the page. This page features the cat, Tinker, decimating soldiers, and Quitely has angled the panels into panes that help imply the speed with which Tinker is moving. Morrison, as a writer, can get into esoteric ideas and be verbose with his ideas regarding science, but some of his best work is when he allows his artists to work without dialogue. For instance, when the pets originally escape, we get several pages worth of rotating security camera footage. It's a masterful way to build suspense and establish the environment. There was a BBC documentary at the time which showed Quitely spent a lot of time planning those pages, creating small squares of footage that he could lay out and arrange until he got the pacing exactly how he wanted it. But at its core, a comic needs the reader to relate to and care about the characters. We 3 is ultimately about someone wanting to get home. Along the journey, our heart breaks for Bandit as he feels like a bad dog when his fellow pet, the rabbit named Pirate, is shot and is dying. And our heart breaks again when we see Bandit thinking he's being a good boy by pulling a soldier out of a river, only for Quitely to slowly pull back on the scene as Bandit walks away, and we realize this soldier has already died a while ago. I'm closing in on what I have to say about Frank Quitely's art, but before I end anything, I have to take a look at All-Star Superman, a 12-issue series. Again, Grant Morrison, Frank Quitely. It is a masterpiece. It is arguably the best Superman story. It deserves its own episode to analyze how that works. For today, I'm really going to be focusing just on the artwork itself. First of all, it's clear just from Quitely's preliminary sketches that he gave a lot of consideration on how to portray Clark Kent and Superman differently in a way that made it plausible that Clark's oldest friends and co-workers may not suspect him of being Superman. Using the same mass, Quitely masterfully utilizes body posture to differentiate the two. Clark hunches over while Superman stands tall. A lot of the book is just fun adventure, like going up against the Prince of the Dino Czar. It also gives us wonderfully melodramatic romance, like this scene where Superman kisses Lois Lane on the moon. But we can even learn from subtle decisions. This page features Superman giving Lois Lane her birthday present, a costume and superpowers for 24 hours. First, there's the composition, drawing our eye from left to right with the reveal of the costume. There's the attention to detail in the folds of the cloth, the body posture telling us how the characters feel without reading the dialogue, the background environment and texture to establish the scene. Again, no shortcuts. Nothing is obscured. This scene features an establishing shot of the bottle city of Kandor. We can see a bustling city, suburbs, and the farmland, forests, and rivers. The story itself involves Lex Luthor luring Superman too close to the sun, and Superman then learning that it has given him a sickness that will kill him within months. Superman resolves to do everything he can to set humanity up to be better after him than before him. Sometimes that's fighting supervillains, and sometimes it's quiet moments like rescuing a suicidal girl. It's not always a good idea to set up a full horizontal panel with stacked panels beside it because it doesn't easily fit the traditional Z pattern we're used to reading. But this scene establishes the height and therefore the stakes involved. It's very empty and lonely. Another scene at the end of the story features Superman flying away, and again, the tall panel helps indicate distance between him and Lois. Some other things in this comic that I noticed. The faces and Kryptonian designs are reminiscent of the late French cartoonist Moebius with the thin line work. Some of the action, with its impeccable detail, reminds me of Jeff Darrow's hyper-complex detail. Superman's origin, arguably one of the most interesting aspects, but one we've seen many times before, is encapsulated in a single page with minimal text. And this page, featuring Clark and Lex Luthor in an interview taking place in prison, is an early precursor to the stairway page Quitely illustrated for Pax Americana that I began this video with. And these are just highlights of a lengthy career. I especially was impressed with this page of a junkie overdosing. His eyes begin to roll to his side and make us, the reader, follow his line of sight, which guides us directly into the next panel. That's some attention to layout that not every artist considers. Other standout stories include JLA Earth 2 and Jupiter's Legacy. I'm fond of the page Quitely did for the Madman 20th Anniversary book, where protagonist Frank Einstein speaks with a therapist, and Quitely analyzes comic structure while Frank analyzes his life. In preparation for this episode, I decided to look at what criticisms were being leveled against Frank Quitely's artwork, because I love it, but let's take a look at another argument, another point of view. And the only thing that I saw consistently leveled were that some people didn't like how he illustrates faces. You know, fair enough, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I do like it. I think that his delicate approach to faces imbues his characters with a lot of humanity, a lot of realistic emotion. But let's play devil's advocate and grant that single critique. Even if we do, it overlooks all the other things that you could say Quitely absolutely does well. Composition, storytelling, environment and landscapes. It sincerely isn't common for an artist to do so many things and make it look easy because they do it with a consistent style. Since 2018, Quitely has done covers, but no interior pages. He's moved on to working on other art that interests him, like murals. I'm grateful for the covers and curious about what he does next. But even if Frank Quitely were to never illustrate any more interior pages, and I think that there is an excellent chance that he still will, but even if he didn't, he has already gifted us with a very large library that we can learn a lot from. If you haven't looked into Frank Quitely's artwork before, I would strongly recommend starting with books like We Three and All-Star Superman. I think that those are great entry points into his work. From there, you've got a lot of interesting stuff. Just so much to list. You can look that stuff up yourself these days with something called the internet. Thank you so much for watching. It means a lot to me. I'm going to be back with another episode next week. Until then, I have marching orders for you. I want you to keep reading comics. Bye. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please consider hitting like and subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, there are merchandise links beneath the YouTube video, and you can always hit join on YouTube or visit Comic Tropes on Patreon to get access to special perks. I think to be a master, you have to have a lot of different tools in your belt. For instance, composition. What else? That's it. Just composition. And finally, the default structure of the Pax Americana pages follows an 8-page... almost said it right. Okay, let's do that again. The result is always far more. After that, I don't know what to say, but I'll say it confidently. The action in the dark hearse, Quitely can pull in for what? Where am I? I lost my place in the script. And it's sincerely, I don't know what I'm saying.